An act of war. That is how billionaire investor Warren Buffett describes Donald Trump's tariffs. And the economic fallout for all Americans bears out Buffett's choice of words. Like touching a hot stove, the Trump administration has now fired off the first salvo in what is right now looking like a trade war that will raise the cost for just about everything Americans spend money on. It comes 12 weeks after an election in which the price of stuff like eggs, groceries, and housing was top of mind for voters. Donald Trump today imposing tariffs against our three biggest trading partners, a whopping 25% on all items coming in from Canada and from Mexico, and an additional 10% on top of what is currently imposed on China. For some context, 43% of all the stuff we buy from abroad comes from those three countries. Unsurprisingly, our largest trading partners are responding to Trump's, quote, act of war. China is imposing a tax of up to 15% on goods exported by U.S. farmers. Washington Post reports this, quote, the move targets some of the United States' most important exports to China, including soybeans, meat, and grains. Canada, which, by the way, is our top supplier of grain and meat and our second largest supplier of auto parts after Mexico, is imposing tariffs on $107 billion worth of goods from the U.S. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau calls Donald Trump's move to punish Canada a, quote, very dumb thing to do. The CEO of retail giant Target is saying today that the impact for American consumers could be immediate. Watch.
We know for certain categories, like fruits and vegetables, where during this winter season, we depend on Mexico for a significant amount of supply. You know, those are categories where we'll try to protect pricing, but the consumer will likely see price increases over the next couple of days.
Over the next couple of days? So those go
are
in
really
instantaneously?
short supply chains. You think about all the fresh produce.
Yeah.
You know, we depend on Mexico during the winter. We're going to try to make sure we can do everything we can to protect pricing. But if there's a 25% tariff, those prices will go up.
For things like what? Strawberries, avocados, bananas? What are we talking about?
You've got that list right.
Is that so?
Those are some of the key items.
And those prices could change within days in the stores?
Could change certainly over the next week.
Within the next week. And there's more. Trump has promised tariffs on aluminum and steel, agricultural products, and foreign cars in the next few weeks, just adding to the turmoil and uncertainty in the global economy. There's a lot at stake here for just about everyone. The tariffs impact the pocketbook issues that keep people up at night. They have the power to sway elections. There's also our standing in the world. New York Times reports this, quote, if Canada and Mexico decide that America is no longer a reliable partner, one that keeps its word and prizes stability over chaos, they may seek other customers for their goods. They could even turn to U.S. adversaries like China. America would end up more isolated on the world stage. The issue isn't just about trade. It's about America's alliances in general. No larger sign of our isolation right now than this. Officials from our normally friendly neighbor to the north talking tough to and about us. Here's the Premier of Ontario, Doug Ford.
If they want to try to annihilate Ontario, I will do everything, including cut off their energy, with a smile on my face. So, and I'm encouraging every other province to do the same. Quebec, Manitoba, BC, we all have to act in unison out east. They rely on our energy. They need to feel the pain. They want to come at us hard. We're going to come back twice as hard.
Donald Trump launching a trade war that will cost consumers and hurt American businesses and potentially leave America isolated on the world stage is where we start today with the aforementioned Premier of Ontario, Doug Ford. Premier Ford, thank you for being here. I saw those remarks. I read the coverage of it. Just tell us again how, first of all, back up and tell us how Trump's moves impact your constituents and impact us here at home.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on, Nicole. And I have to tell you, Canada loves the U.S. They love the American people. There's one person that's created this chaos, and that's President Trump. You know, President Trump had a mandate to come in and cut costs and create more jobs. That's a total opposite. Manufacturing plants will close. Assembly lines will shut down in the auto sector within the next week. unemployment will go up and inflation will go up, cost of gas will go up. And this is the last thing we want to do. We are your #1 customer in the world, Canada. We buy more products than anyone. We buy 400% more vehicles than Mexico, 200% more than any jurisdiction in the world. And by the way, you take the energy, the 4.3 million barrels that we ship down every single day to keep your economy going, take that off the balance sheet. The U.S. has a $56 billion trade surplus with Canada, and I have no problem with that. Ontario alone is the engine of Canada. We're the largest economic driver. If we were a standalone country, we'd be the 3rd largest trading partner in the world to the U.S. Ontario alone. We're the #1 trading partner to 17 states, #2 to 11 other ones. And across Canada, we're the #1 trading partner to 28 states. I want to ship the U.S. more electricity. I want to ship them more high-grade nickel. That 50% of your economy and your military relies on nickel, high-grade nickel coming from Ontario. We have more critical minerals than anywhere in the world. I don't want to go to China. I don't want to ship it out. But he keeps putting, these threats and trying to attack our families and our businesses. We'll have no choice. And I'm the first to say, let's tariff China. They're the problem, not your closest friend and ally. We up here in Canada, we find it ironic. We love the Americans, and here he is cozying up to Putin. You got to be kidding me. When we stood shoulder to shoulder with each other for a couple centuries right now, through tough times, and we were there for the Americans, and you've been there for us. So this is, as far as I'm concerned, Nicole, it's the craziest thing I've ever seen in my life. But we're going to get hurt, but the Americans are going to get hurt tremendously.
Let's go through some of the items and just help me understand and us understand the interconnectedness that makes this possible. You said this. Today I'm writing to every senator, congressman and woman, and the governors from New York State, Michigan, and Minnesota, telling them that if these tariffs persist, if the Trump administration follows through on any more tariffs, we will immediately apply a 25% surcharge on the electricity we export. We will not hesitate to shut off their power as well. Could the lights go out in some of those states where you supply electricity?
Well, that's the last thing I want to do, but I'm going to implement immediately 25% surcharge. We keep 1.5 million homes and businesses lit up in New York State, in Michigan, in Minnesota. I've talked to all 3 governors. And I have to apologize to the American people that we're going through this. This is totally unnecessary. We're your strongest ally. But to answer your question, yes, when our plants start shutting down and we have large unemployment lines and people are trying to pay their mortgages and put food on their table, I will use every single tool in our toolkit to fight back. And that's the last thing I want to do. Nicole, I love the Americans. I spent 20 years of my life in Chicago and New Jersey, and all Canadians love Americans. It's one person that's causing this problem. And it's unacceptable as far as I'm concerned. Let's continue building the 2 strongest nations in the world. I call it the AMCAN fortress. We have the critical minerals. We have the energy. We have the steel and the aluminum that you need. We have the lumber to build their homes. And he's going after it all. So what else can we do? We're going to start shipping it to countries around the world. And that's what we're going to do. We have more critical minerals than anywhere in the world right here in Ontario. So, let's work this out. Let's move forward. And let's be 2 great partners as we have been for a couple hundred years.
You ripped up Ontario's contract with Starlink. Explain that.
Well, we tore it up. I can't have anyone who's connected so deeply with President Trump trying to destroy our province and try to destroy our country. It's unacceptable. We're the largest purchaser of alcohol in the entire world. Ontario is. We have a liquor control board, so it all goes through the province. We ship up 3,600 products from the U.S. from 35 states. We have now cleared off all alcohol across all the shelves, And I just encouraged all our premiers, which they just agreed to, they're pulling all their alcohol off. So states like Kentucky, they're bourbon. They're going to be laying people off. They may be shutting parts of their plants down, which again, as far as I'm concerned, is unacceptable. We shouldn't have to be doing this whatsoever. I'm going to stockpile the high-grade nickel and sell it to the rest of the world. That China has the market cornered on it. 50% of your products that you manufacture nickel with in the military come from Ontario. That's stopped. I'm cutting off everything we possibly can. I don't want to do it. I'd rather do the opposite, shipping more high-grade nickel and more lithium and more cobalt and every other critical mineral that we have up here. But unfortunately, there's one person that should be held accountable, and that's President Trump.
Actually, we've had a lot of experience with them. They're an act of war to some degree. Over time, their attacks on goods. I mean, the tooth fairy doesn't pay up. I mean, and see, you always have to just, and then what? You always have to ask that question in economics. Always say, and then what?
That is, of course, legendary investor Warren Buffett, a warning Sunday morning about President Trump's tariffs, which did go into effect, 25% tariffs, in fact, on imports from Canada and Mexico going in overnight. The Trump administration imposing an extra 10% tariff on China on top of the already instituted 10% tax on Chinese imports. Both China and Canada moved swiftly after midnight to retaliate, announcing their own levies on U.S. goods. Canada vowed tariffs of up to 25%. And late yesterday, the Premier of Ontario, Doug Ford, warned the economic back and forth will be a disaster for both countries.
It's one person that's coming to attack us economically. Your closest friend, your treasured ally that will stand shoulder to shoulder with you in every situation you've faced. And he's attacking the person, his number one customer. There's no country in the world that buys more products off the U.S. than we do. We're the number one trading customer to 28 states. And a lot of them are red states. They're going to feel the pain like they've never felt before.
Meanwhile, Mexico's president expected to announce her response at a news conference in Mexico City later this morning. Together, China, Canada, and Mexico accounted for more than 40% of all U.S. imports last year. Also, its top three export markets for the United States. Let's bring in the anchor of CNBC's Worldwide Exchange, Frank Holland. Frank, so how are the markets reacting to these new tariffs? Looked like they kind of were anticipating them yesterday.
Yeah, good morning. Right now, we're looking at the futures. I'm looking right now, I mean, basically flat, moving fractionally higher or lower. But of course, yesterday, we saw a major sell-off on Wall Street with the S&P 500, often called the broader market, having its worst day of the year. The tech-heavy NASDAQ down more than 2.5%. So these tariffs, they're raising a lot of questions for investors, business leaders, and small business owners. We can't leave Main Street out of this. The questions are, will they spark inflation? Will they metaphorically be the straw on the back of the camel for the consumer that's already stretched thin? And what will other countries do in response? From tariffs to other measures. Today, we saw China put U.S. biotech company Illumina on their list of companies that they believe threaten national security. And while these kind of things, it's not necessarily official retaliation. There's other companies that work within China that need state approval for different business initiatives. One name often mentioned is Apple. They essentially need Chinese government approval to launch their Apple Intelligence service for iPhones there. So as we look at this, the question is, what kind of impact will tariffs have on the U.S. economy and on the markets? We had the head of research for J.P. Morgan on my show yesterday. According to her research, last year, the effective tariff rate here in the U.S., it was about 2%, just over that. With these tariffs that went into effect today, that's going to jump up to approximately 9%. And then we also have a Wall Street that's become increasingly sensitive to economic reports and economic data. Yesterday, we had one that certainly seemed to shock investors. It came from the Atlanta Fed. They put out a forecast for GDP, gross domestic product, kind of the report card for the economy. They update it on a regular basis. So back on February 28th, they had a forecast of GDP being down 1.5% for Q1. Yesterday, they put out a new forecast down 2.8%. Certainly a shock to the market, a big change when it comes to that. So a lot of questions about these tariffs and how's it all going to play out. There was some thought before that these tariffs, they were a negotiating ploy, but now we see the president's very serious about implementing them.
GDP down, inflation up. CNBC's Frank Holland. Frank, thanks so much. We'll be watching those markets as they open a short time from now. Joe, just looking at the Wall Street Journal op-ed page, the title, Trump takes the dumbest tariff plunge. They write, we've courted Mr. Trump's ire by calling the Mexico and Canada levies the dumbest in history, and we may have understated the point, writes the Wall Street Journal, closing by calling Trump unbridled tariff man, saying he was always going to be a big economic risk in a second term, and here we are, writes the Wall Street Journal.
I mean, it's unbelievable. He says that 25% levies on Mexico and Canada will begin today. And again, here's the Wall Street Journal editorial page Willie was talking about. And Ed Luce, you've got a lot of really smart people over at Financial Times that went to those really smart schools, I'm sure, over in Britain. So maybe you can help me out here. And I'm dead serious. I mean, this Wall Street Journal obviously been consistent on this. When Donald Trump got into office, we talked about how the economy was strong, but I talked about we had three bubbles. We had the fiscal bubble, a $36 trillion debt that at some point is going to be a bomb that's going to wreck our economy and the world's economy if we don't take care of it. No, it doesn't look like they're going to take care of that. We have the crypto bubble. That, of course, is blowing up right now. And we have the stock market bubble. And so the point was, we have to handle this with care. We can't go around talking about tariffs. We can't go around talking about fights with our best trading partners. And now here we are more than a month in, and what do we have? More threats of tariffs. You've got consumer confidence going down. You've got all those mergers that everybody said, oh, we're going to dive into after those left-wingers from the Biden administration leave Washington. They were saying that on Wall Street. Now they're afraid to do anything because of the uncertainty that's surrounding it. And with consumer confidence down, now you're seeing the Atlanta Fed, and I suspect it's not going to be that bad. I mean, I don't think we're going to be like minus 3% at the end of the first quarter, but the economy is grinding down and slowing down. The stock market over the past month has dropped a great deal. You just look at Tesla's stock numbers over the past month and see how they've dropped. Look how the NASDAQ has dropped. Look how the top tech companies have dropped. All of it around uncertainty. All of this talk. You know, a lot of people assumed that this tariff talk was just sort of, you know, just posturing and negotiating. But even if it ends up being that, Ed, it's having a detrimental impact on this economy and shaking investors and shaking consumers to their core.
Yeah, I mean, the school of wishful thinking after last November was, look, we've got Scott Bessent, we've got Howard Lutnick, we've got adults being appointed to these roles, and they're not going to let Trump carry out such suicidal actions. And that explains to some degree why the stock market remained so frothy during most of the transition, and why Bitcoin and others were surging. But the school of wishful thinking was wishful thinking. This is Trump in charge. It's not Scott Bessent in charge. It's not Howard Lutnick in charge. And what he's just outlined, what he's just announced with these huge tariffs against America's three largest trading partners by far, by the way, China, Mexico, and Canada, is the largest tax increase on the American consumer since 1993. It's not a tax on foreign companies. It's a tax on the American consumer, something Trump refuses to acknowledge, but is borne out by all the economics on this subject. And at a time when, as you mentioned, Joe, consumer confidence is not just falling, it's falling steeply, it's falling sharply. This is going to be a hammer blow because people are going to see higher prices. And those higher prices are going to cause the Fed not to cut interest rates and quite possibly to raise them because they are inflationary. And we are then going to start to get into a situation where the Atlanta Fed's projections for the first quarter become reality for 2 quarters, which is a shrinking economy, which is a Trump recession, and which would be an avoidable Trump recession. This is self-inflicted harm that we're seeing at enormous speed.
Well, and that's one of the reasons that we and other people have been warning from the very beginning that there's that Donald Trump inherited a strong economy. Handle it with care, because there are a lot of plates that are spinning. And right now it appears that the goal is to let those plates fall to the ground and break and see exactly what happens. Jonathan Lemire, so what I need you to do right now is tell our viewers, not what the reports appear to say or what Warren Buffett appears to say. What are people inside the White House? What are people closest to Donald Trump telling you? What does your reporting tell you about the White House's view on why they are doing this when the economy's in a precarious position? What do they hope to get out of this?
It's two parts here, Joe. First of all, there is just the pure politics part of this. Trump, we talked about this yesterday, has believed in tariffs. It's one of the few through lines of his political ideology. Even as he's shifted back and forth on many issues, including what party he belongs to, he has always believed in tariffs, despite what economists warn. And he promised them. It was so central to what he talked about all last year on the campaign trail, in his early weeks in office. There was a sense there that he had to follow through. He couldn't be seen as just bluffing. I think they believe that tariffs can be a tool. And again, we've just gone through the reasons why economists think it's a bad idea. They believe tariffs can be a tool to push some of these trading partners, even our closest allies, to give up something, to negotiate something here. And I think for Mexico, it remains the border. Trump has been privately frustrated that the border crossings go low. He wants them even lower. He wants more deportations. He feels like he needs to have a show with Mexico. Let's twin this with...
Let me ask you this, though. I thought border crossings on the southern border were pretty darn low. I thought that they were lower than they've been in years. That's number one. Number two, I thought Mexico was already moving troops to the border. Number three, I thought the problem was not coming from Mexico. The problem was coming from the United States, and that they're just not able to find quickly enough for the president's appetite enough migrants to deport. I thought that was the problem with the numbers. Is this, and this is not a leading question, but how is this a Mexico problem right now? Because I thought illegal border crossings were relatively low right now from Mexico.
That they are, but this is still the Trump's White House's point of view, which is that they still want it to be even lower. Also, let's twin this with the reporting from last week from the Wall Street Journal about how Secretary Hegseth from the Pentagon suggested there might even be U.S. military options within Mexico because of the way the cartels, the U.S. claims, are working with the Mexican government to get fentanyl across the border. And that was the other part of this. It's not just migrants. It's about the drugs coming across the border from the White House's point of view. Mexico's pushed back saying, well, the issue is the U.S. not being able to curb the demand for those drugs inside our own borders. But they believe the tariffs can still be a tool. White House aides, Willie, have told me that these may not be in place all that long. If Trump can claim some sort of concession, some sort of victory, whether it is on the numbers or some other ill-defined measure that allows him to say, hey, another one, look tough, get a win, we'll move on before there's too much economic damage. That may be how this plays out. But Trump, in a way, I'm told by a few people, had sort of backed himself into a corner, that he needed to, at least for a time being, put in place some tariffs.
Joining me now, Peter Baker, chief White House correspondent for the New York Times and an MSNBC political analyst. Tara Setmayer is a former Republican communications director. But we begin with NBC's business and data correspondent, Brian Chung. Brian.
Hey there, Chris. These tariffs are going to be targeting our neighbors to the north and south with a very substantial tariff of 25%. That took effect at midnight, in addition to an additional 10% tariff on China. This is going to cover many different types of goods. For example, fruits and vegetables that come in from Mexico. We also get a lot of produce from Canada as well in the form of potatoes and also grain. But you have to remember that steel and aluminum are part of this as well. This is a really, really big deal when it comes to the economic relationship between the United States and our neighbors neighbors to the north and south, specifically when it comes to the automotive industry. We import so many parts from Mexico and then assemble so many cars in Canada, which means that in some cases you have the same vehicle that might be sold in the United States that gets tariffed multiple times. That's the reason why you have some groups like the Anderson Economic Group that is projecting that in some cases some vehicles can get as much as $10,000 more expensive as a result of these tariffs. We've already heard some retail companies opine on the tariffs this morning, the likes of Target and also Best Buy chiming in on this. Best Buy saying that, quote, our entire assortment will pass along some level of tariff costs to retailers, making price increases for American consumers, quote, highly likely. And then Target saying in their fourth quarter earnings that if there's a 25% tariff, those prices will go up. So these are coming to stores near you, really kind of underscoring the reaction on the Wall Street as well, which has reacted negatively to the announcement of these tariffs. But we'll have to see. As we know, the president has promised even higher tariffs on the campaign trail. Could this be the beginning of this trade war, which is only just in the early stages? We'll have to see. Back to you, Chris.
Thanks so much, Peter. Thanks so much, Brian. Peter, stock market tanking, threat of even higher prices. I mean, and all of this, obviously, as the president has a pretty big speech tonight with the idea of telling the citizens of America that things are getting better. Talk about what you're seeing and the challenge now facing Donald Trump, which seems to be moving by the minute.
Yeah, there seems to be a conflict here between Trump priorities, right? He's always talking about tariffs. Tariffs is an instrument of power that he likes to wield, in part because he can do it himself without needing Congress, right? He has the complete flexibility, at least as the law is currently being interpreted, to impose these tariffs on neighbors to influence their policy. But he's saying he's doing this in order to stem the flow of fentanyl. Because fentanyl deaths are on the rise. In fact, they're on the decline. They've been actually going down substantially in the last year, so about 24% down last year compared to the year before. And very little of it actually comes over the border from Canada. And yet Canada, our largest trading partner, is the one that he is focused on along with Mexico and China. And I think that it's in conflict with his promise to lower prices. He says, well, the foreign governments pay the tariffs. That's obviously just not true. And we'll see whether this continues to have an impact. The stock market is important because it's one thing he pays attention to. It's a metric that matters to him. He likes to brag about stock markets going up. So far, if you've been in the markets during the 6 weeks he's been in office, you've lost money.
So, Tara, on this issue of tackling inflation, which we know was a key promise for a lot of folks, there's a comment by Trump's agriculture secretary that is really catching fire. She was asked about how Americans should cope with higher egg prices.
I think the silver lining in all of this is how do we, in our backyards, we've got chickens too in our backyard, how do we solve for something like this? And people are sort of looking around thinking, wow, well, maybe I could get a chicken in my backyard.
You're a communications expert. What is a Republican member of Congress supposed to do with that?
Yeah, this is problematic. Republican members of Congress are already feeling the heat from a lot of their constituents because the DOGE cuts, the indiscriminate decapitation of a lot of our federal agencies here, is impacting everyone across the board. It's not just the owning the libs that a lot of MAGAs thought that they were getting by supporting Donald Trump. Republican lawmakers have to answer for what's happening in their own communities, and farmers, agriculture, veterans, all of these things are being impacted by this. And the price of eggs was the signature catchphrase for the election. But the price of eggs, well, according to Trump's own USDA, egg prices are going to go up possibly to 40% more for the rest of the year. And that is something that I think could have been, if what's going on could be handled better, they would need to explain to the American people, well, why are egg prices at 40% higher now? You promised us you would bring the cost of everyday goods down. This tariff war does not do that either. I think the Republicans are going to have to explain to the American people why Donald Trump's actions so far in his few weeks that he's been in office, how has that improved their lives? It hasn't. And no matter what they keep saying, they're trying to gaslight the American people into believing that everything's better. This is much better. You're going to have to go through some pain, but it'll be better eventually. I don't think that's what the American people voted for. They didn't hear about that some pain part first. in order to get this magical, better economic situation when the economic situation was actually pretty good under Joe Biden. But a lot of the American people didn't feel it. They're feeling it right now. And at his joint address tonight to Congress and to the American people, it's going to be very difficult to try to tell the American people they're not feeling what they're feeling or seeing what they're seeing when it comes to the stock market and the prices of everyday goods. Tariffs don't work.
One suggestion we've heard, Tara, is that, well, this is Joe Biden. You know, we inherited Joe Biden's economy. We're still working on getting out of it, in spite of the fact that he said he was going to bring prices down on day one. But how do you message that in a convincing way tonight?
Well, I think that's the challenge. I mean, Donald Trump is very good at repeating things over and over again, whether they're true or they're not. He can try to continue to blame Joe Biden, his predecessor, for the mess that we're in now. But frankly, Joe Biden left Donald Trump with a very good economy and an excellent stock market, and people's 401ks and the prices of eggs were actually lower than they are right now. So, you know, this is, I think that what they're going to do is they're going to say that we need to do this in order to assert, American first priorities. But again, it's going to be difficult for them because it doesn't make sense. Tariffs are a tax on the American consumer. The American consumer pays the tariff, not the foreign country. And so it'll be interesting to see how Republicans message this when they know deep down inside that this is not a good idea to go and get into a trade war with our friends in the North and in the South, who we rely on and who have been reliable, good partners for the United States economically.
Peter, the CEO of Target and Brian Chung touched on Target, but he issued a warning today. Let me play that.
We'll try to protect pricing, but the consumer will likely see price increases over the next couple of days.
The next couple of days, Peter. The Wall Street Journal also ran an op-ed by Michigan Senator Gary Peter. He warned that prices for some vehicles, again, will rise as much as $10,000. Obviously, that's the heart of car manufacturing in the United States. What are the chances any of this has an impact on how Donald Trump thinks and talks about tariffs?
Well, I mean, look, it could be a short-term thing. You never know with Donald Trump, right? He has a habit of taking drastic actions like this and then reversing himself within a few days because he has some sort of, modest concessions he can point to and claim victory and go home if he decides this is just too damaging. So we don't really know. He's an unpredictable character in that sense. But if it were to go on for a long time, if this were to, in fact, have a more enduring impact on the economy, I think then you're going to start seeing Republicans starting to speak out because they understand that the economy is crucial to their reelection chances in a year and a half when they're facing voters at the midterms. And, the one thing that Trump really has had going for him politically over the years was the perception that he was, a presider over a good economy. He likes to say the best economy in history. That's not true, obviously. He's taken more credit for the economy than it really has, in terms of his actual quality, but it is central to his political identity. And if that begins to shake, then a lot of these other things, the fear, I think, on the part of Republicans is it could fray the overall standing for the party.
So elsewhere, Republican lawmakers are shrugging off recent disapproval and outrage at town hall events, instead blaming the backlash on what they say are paid troublemakers. President Trump took to social media yesterday to claim, without any evidence, that these troublemakers were attending and disrupting town hall meetings as part of a game for Democrats. Similar sentiments were expressed last week by House Speaker Mike Johnson, who claimed those speaking out against GOP policies were simply unhappy Dems. Over the weekend, Senator Roger Marshall of Kansas even walked out of a town hall early after he was confronted by constituents. And then he claimed to NBC News that those speaking out at that town hall were, quote, people from the big city. Which one? Here's one exchange from that town hall, followed by Senator Marshall's description of those who questioned him.
What the government is doing right now as far as cutting out those jobs, a huge percentage of those people, and I know you care about the veterans, are veterans.
Yes.
And that is a damn shame.
Yes. Yeah.
That is a damn shame.
I'm not a Democrat, but I'm worried about the veterans, man.
Well, I yielded to one of my elders, and I appreciate his comments. I think it's a great. I'm not gonna. We don't have time for everyone to stand up. I do got 2 more commitments today. Appreciate everybody making the drive out, and God bless America. Thank you.
Pictures with you, buddy, right?
So the big disappointment was, here's a county, 3,000 people, less than 3,000. They're all connected to agriculture. So they wouldn't let me talk about agriculture or rural America. So people from the big city drove 5 hours so they could silence rural people who really are on tough times right now. Over 85% of people in that county voted for President Trump. I looked at the car tags, okay? I'm not done. All I have to do is look at the car tags. When there's more Mercedes-Benz there than there are pickup trucks, I know they're not from rural America.
From what we saw in the video just now, it seemed to counter the senator's claims. You heard the boos when he walked out. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries pushed back on those very GOP claims yesterday, saying, "We don't need to send paid protesters into your town hall meetings. The American people are with us." And Molly, this dovetails nicely to what you've been writing about, because there are some in the Democratic Party who suggest the Dems should sort of lie back right now, like to stay out of the way, let the Republicans kind of damage themselves. But you take the opposite approach.
Yeah, I think that's a huge mistake, especially because we've seen Republicans unable or unwilling to protect norms and institutions, right? We did not see any senators, any Republican senators stand up for the norms and institutions of the cabinet secretaries, their Article 2 responsibility. They were, I don't know if they're all in on the MAGA agenda or scared of the MAGA agenda, but whatever it is, we did not see them stand up for the norms and institutions that we love so dearly in this country. And so it falls to the Democrats. And I think there's a real anger in this country, and we've seen it. There's a punter called Chris Cluey who's been talking about it in these town hall meetings. There's this kind of, and I'm not sure that Democratic politicians see it or even understand it or even like it. They have really pushed back against this groundswell of people, but you're seeing throughout the country protests and a lot of anger. And remember, these cuts haven't even really happened yet. So we still have this fulsome federal government. It is going to be the cuts they're talking about are humongous. And remember, 30% of the federal government is veterans. So you're going to see a lot of jobless veterans. And I have trouble imagining that the people who are so angry are going to feel better when they are confronted with the reality of lots of local jobless veterans.
I think it would have been quite a newsflash to the gentleman that stood up in that Kansas meeting talking about veterans, that he was a big city slicker that came in from a Mercedes, or the second guy who spoke, who was wearing a U.S. Army shirt. I mean, I don't know. Maybe Roger Marshall is now going to say that primetime Fox News hosts who are complaining about veterans being fired from the Pentagon after serving this country honorably for 20 years. I wonder if Senator Marshall would say that they're big city slickers. We've all seen town hall meetings, and we've all seen things where you have people from the outside that come in to make a point. You also can tell when it's a groundswell. We saw it in 2009 during the Obamacare debate. We saw people like our own Claire McCaskill going out, and thousands of people being there complaining about not being able to keep their own doctor. We saw that across the country. When in the 1990s, we had to make some pretty tough cuts to balance the budget. I had people that supported me the entire way, saying, balance the budget, Joe, balance the budget, Joe. The second we started to balance the budget and started to make cuts, people showed up at town hall meetings. What you did is you sat there, you listened, you explained what you were trying to do, and if there was any way that you could round off the sharpest of the edges, you took that as a great chance to learn and take it back to Washington in your subcommittees, your committee, on the House floor. That's how democracy works. That's how our constitutional republic works. You have these Republicans running out of town hall meetings, scared. That's a bad sign. You don't want to do that. You listen to your constituents and you respond. And even, Jackie, even Republicans on Capitol Hill, I know you know this, but I mean, tell us what your reporting has shown, have complained about the DOGE cuts being, well, first of all, not being transparent, the process not being transparent, but also being so random that you do get the wrong people fired at times. And now a lot of Republicans very concerned about massive cuts in Medicaid, when anywhere from 33 to 50% of children in red state America, in rural America, actually get their health care from Medicaid.
There are certainly a lot of complaints about sort of the philosophical approach here, and some of the decisions that are being made there are really anathema, I think, to the MAGA movement. For example, why hasn't defense spending been targeted the way that some of these other areas have been targeted right now? I mean, there's a huge constituency in the America First movement that has wanted to slash the sort of what they call the industrial defense industry, and they're not seeing that happen, but they're now seeing issues that directly affect their constituents happening. And Joe, I mean, you know this firsthand. I mean, this is legislating in Congress 101, when, you know, there are some things that you can sort of avoid on a national level, but when you're at these town halls and you're in the district and these things are bubbling up right off the bat from constituents, that's when you know that there is a problem bubbling there. My colleague Emily Davies wrote an incredible piece about a National Park Service ranger who was fired during the first round of cuts, who voted for Donald Trump because she thought she was going to get free in vitro fertilization through the government. This profile goes through how she's now regretting that vote. I think there are lots of people like her that we're going to keep hearing from in the next few months, years.
Yeah, and some of those folks will be populating the Capitol tonight as guests of Democratic lawmakers. Jackie Alemany, thank you so much, and we absolutely look forward to you coming on board as an MSNBC Washington correspondent and co-host of MSNBC's The Weekend. Congrats again.
Thanks, John.